This is Yakini coming to you from ADHD Love, and we have another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk, and I'm very excited to have Elizabeth on. We had a bit of technical difficulties, so I asked her back, and she said yes, so I'm very excited to have her back. So I just wanted her to first introduce herself, and then we'll get moving with the questions. So Elizabeth, please introduce yourself.
So thanks for having me back. That's good news. That means that whatever we did must have gone well. So I'm Elizabeth Brink, and I coach women who have ADHD or suspect that they do, or just challenged with executive function and managing the overwhelm of their lives. I myself also have ADHD and anxiety, and spend a lot of time researching and learning about it, and just helping people clear the fog.
Yeah, that is so important, especially now, because as I'm researching it, I find out, like myself, women tend to get diagnosed later on in life. So can you talk quickly about that? Why is that? Why is it happening where women are getting diagnosed later, where men as boys were getting diagnosed more when they were younger, more as school-age children?
Well, a lot of times it's the hyperactive boys that are diagnosed because they have discipline challenges in the classroom. So often it's more obvious. You might not even notice an inattentive boy. He would probably not be diagnosed until later in life. Mm-hmm. So, girls with the hyperactivity doesn't always look like a physical manifestation of that hyperactivity beyond talkativeness. And often the school setting for a lot of people creates a certain amount of structure that can really help with ADD. So what you'll see is for women, as they head into later years in life and hormonal changes and shifts, and if they enter into motherhood, or if they even try that path and do fertility treatment, then they've got more hormonal shifts, and that can create kind of the perfect storm for increased symptom disruption with ADD. So then, a lot of times they're either getting their child diagnosed, or they themselves are suddenly finding themselves sitting in the middle of motherhood and thinking, I wasn't cut out for this. This is way too much. I am not good at this. This was my experience. Like, maybe I don't like this. And even though I dreamed of being a mom. And so I think it's at that point that they start seeking out answers for what is going on? Like, why does my life look so much more chaotic than my neighbors or my best friend?
That makes perfect sense. So a little bit about you. So when did you find out that you had ADHD? When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed as a kid. So in the 4th grade, I was talkative. There was a lot of like, we've moved her everywhere we can in the classroom, and she's talking to the boys. So something's going on. I guess 4th grade girls back in that day, it was a long time ago, didn't want to talk to the boys. I didn't care. I could talk to a wall. So they flagged it. And I think also my mom felt like my grades were too low for an elementary schooler that she felt like was brighter than the C's that I was bringing home. So she really advocated for me, and we were able to get a full, assessment and diagnosis when I was in the 4th grade, and then really kind of worked through some strategies to help me manage it. My mom did a ton of research. But back in those days, ADD was thought to be something that you outgrew or that you could control. And some people still do see the outgrowing it, which is a whole other topic and discussion. But for me, that wasn't the case. But as I got a little bit older, more into adolescence, I de-emphasized it. I didn't want attention drawn to me, and my parents kind of followed my lead. Other family stuff was going on. And so really, I identify a lot with people who were diagnosed as adults, even though I had a childhood diagnosis. Gotcha. What we know now about ADD is so different from what we knew then. And when I became an adult and started to see my life kind of was a mess, that's when I started to question, like, what is going on, getting exposure to ADHD again and realizing, oh, I still have that. So it was kind of a lifelong journey that I am still on. But my initial diagnosis as a child was definitely a helpful point, but it's not the end all be all. If you did not get diagnosed as a child and are feeling like my life could have turned out completely different, I just want you to hear me say, maybe. maybe not.
Right, right. That makes sense. So you have this diagnosis. How did you take it? Like, what did you, I mean, you did explain a lot in terms of, kind of just keeping it to the side for now, and your parents following it, but just overall, how did you take that diagnosis?
I don't really have any memories about it. I know that as I entered middle school, I had a sense that the weird kids went to the office to take medicine. Like that's the only real memory I have around like, well, the weird kids do that and I don't want to be a weird kid. So I don't want to take medicine. Um, and I knew that I needed certain things. Like I knew that for me to get my work done at home, I had to sit in we had like a little tiny hallway near our laundry room. It was, I mean, hallway is a very generous term. It was like a box, like a closet. And it was completely white walls. And my mom set up a tiny little like student desk in that area that was also white. And she set up like a big box fan on the floor. And that's where I had to do my homework. And I, to this day, have to set up like a distraction free zone and
Yep.
have white noise going if I really need to problem solve. So some of that understanding how it was going to impact my day to day was definitely something that was brought to my awareness. But then how I felt about it or how I managed it, I don't know that I really remember. And there was a lot of other stuff going on in our family at that time. So that's also partly why maybe I don't remember. But a lot of parents I know stress out about, or they really worry. I don't want to minimize it. They worry about the effect on their kid of getting a diagnosis or a label.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not, it's not unreasonable to
Right.
worry about that or to be cautious about how you talk about these things with your kids. It is important.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And luckily, I was really blessed with I will say, a different world in terms of, my parents were always supportive. So even when I went to get my child diagnosed, and when I went to talk to them about it, they've always been very open, especially my mom. I will say more my mom. I mean, she was always very open with me. So I'm always open in terms of conversation. If people look at me weird, I'm still okay with it because, I know that this is helping him, right? Having this diagnosis is helping him because it allows me to put strategies in place for him. And I wouldn't know what to do if I never got the diagnosis. So I completely understand, to your point, you don't want to minimize it because some people do look at it negatively, but I look at it as a very positive thing. So I totally understand that. Totally get it. So, so you went through this diagnosis and now you're a mom. So as a parent, how are you managing your diagnosis? And, separate from those, and we'll talk about those who have ADHD kids, but just as an ADHD mom, how are you managing your day-to-day?
So, I mean, that's a great question. And it is a day-to-day thing. And so I think a big part of it for me was kind of coming through the early parts of motherhood, which I'm still in the midst of. My kids are young. I got a late start. And so for me, and I say this a lot to the people that I work with and on social media, I say, an ADHD diagnosis is helpful. It can be helpful. Not everybody needs it. It can be helpful, but it's not a destination.
Right.
So the point is not to get that label and then to feel like, great, I know what to do now, or great, I know where to look. It will help and it will give you some information. But I think for me in managing my ADD with my kids is really seeing it as a journey and looking at myself holistically and saying, some of the things that I am struggling with are not ADD related, but it can be easy to hear that message over and over because there's so much coexisting conditions. Most people with ADD have anxiety and or depression as well. And so you'll hear people talk about the experience of ADD, and what they're really talking about is PTSD and anxiety disorders that are as a result, maybe not, hard to know. And so some of it has just been being really open to the fact that, I'm not perfect. None of us are. That's not the goal. And to the degree that my ADD is keeping me from finishing what I start and from breaking down something really complicated to even know where to start, or knowing that I need some extra accountability to make sure that if I get stuck, I have a way to get unstuck. Those are the things around ADD that I have had to build into my own life. And some of the like sensory stuff, I have some of the auditory sensory stuff. So knowing when I'm feeling like, so that preemptive, like knowing when I could, that could be a recipe for a meltdown for me, which then, trickles out to the children. So I think that whole piece of like managing it for myself has been working with a coach for myself, coaching other women, learning a ton about it, learning about anxiety and depression, learning about other like postpartum mood disorders, doing therapy, support groups, all of these places where you're starting to get a better picture of yourself. It's not about, I need to be the fact machine about ADHD. I need to know me so that I can understand how to work with me in the context of motherhood, in the context of entrepreneurship, in marriage, all these other places where I live my life, where I do have life. So for me, it's been a mix of a lot of supports and just really staying open to the fact that no one thing is the answer for why being a mom is hard. It's like some of it is just that it's hard.
Right, exactly. And there's just no, I mean, as much as you read about it, as much as you talk about it, as much as you engage with other people about it, the bottom line is your experience is going to be most likely different than somebody else's, right? But to your point, having some of these can help you in certain situations. But again, it's your journey. So yeah, that's very key. So now let's talk about, okay, so I at least have a good understanding of what's going on. I'm learning how to manage it. Now, how do I deal with my ADHD children? How do I help take some of the tips or maybe some of the things that I'm learning to help them?
Yeah, so great question. I think from my own experience saying, I think that it's really important that you also see this as a journey and that you kind of instill that into your children so that as they grow, they don't attribute every struggle that they have to ADD, and they also don't feel shame over some of the other things that may come up for them, social anxiety or depression or things. So really that kind of keeping open that like you may have other stuff going on and they might eventually too, and that there's space for that and for it to not be like, this has to be ADD or otherwise it has to be a secret. So that's a big managing it. My kids are young, and so it's yet to be seen if they have ADD. It's not out of the question because I have it and many of my family members do. But I think a big part of it is, just knowing that you need help, because there's only so much you can do to learn, like eat up and drink up all the information you can find in every corner of the internet before you get to a place where you're completely overwhelmed and you don't even know exactly what is going to work for your kids. So actually getting help to figure out what ADHD looks like for your child or for you and what's going to work for you and what's not. There's so many tips and tricks out there. I often warn my clients, like, don't just go try everything. Don't go buy every planner or calendar or special app because it might not work for you. So that discovery, being really curious and exploring and getting to know your kid, getting to recognize when they are struggling and what might be causing it, helping them explore and investigate when they get stuck is going to help you to know what kinds of strategies to try and when to know when one is not working and it needs to be adjusted. So just a lot of grace, a lot of room to be flawed and to be trying things, but do not try it all at the same time.
That makes actually perfect sense. Yeah, perfect sense. So for that very new parent, well, not new parent, for the parent that just got their child diagnosed, is that some of your tips too, is to get to know them, just see where they are before you even try to figure out, what direction to go?
Yeah. I would say, you know, really trust your instinct around what you know of your child. You know a lot about them. So if you're looking at infographics or you're reading articles or attending support groups and you're hearing other things and you're like, that must be them too, it's good to question it. It's good to filter that stuff through and to say, could my child be experiencing that? But do not take all of it on as fact for you, for your circumstances and your kid. You know, really trying to understand what it looks like for them is a big piece of it. I would say that my biggest my biggest recommendation is around pacing yourself. There's so much that you can do, but what can happen is, especially if you have ADD, you can get like really intrigued and get all these dopamine hits in your research and then get exhausted from learning about it. The people around you can get exhausted and start to shut down. And then you can get really agitated that there's not progress. You can get mad at yourself. You can get mad at your kid. Like, why isn't this working? This is the 8th medicine we've tried and the 17th desk arrangement, and like nothing's going to work. And so if you don't pace yourself, it can make things worse. And it can create an environment where there's not room to keep exploring. So go slow, pace yourself, find help. Chad.org has support groups, not everywhere, but in a lot of communities. There are ADHD coaches that work specifically with young kids, with adolescents, and with adults that are a great resource to plug into. And with coaching, sometimes it's, you know, just a month or, you know, just 6 months or so of like working with somebody to get to know what's going on with you, and then really helping you learn what are the symptoms you need to compensate for? What does your kid need support around versus just assuming, right? All of that stuff. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Okay, so are there any other resources that you talked about, you know, looking possibly at coaching, for example, but any books or any YouTube channels or anything that you think would be great for a parent who is wanting to learn more?
Yeah, so definitely check out all of the rest of ADHD Love content that you can find, because it's great. There is also, and I mean that, it's like so true. I'm so glad you're here in this space. There is a coach, Caroline McGuire, who has written a book called Why Will No One Play With Me? And she talks a lot about the social development of our ADHD kids. And it is like, it is so important. I cannot underscore it enough. Most parents approach it from an academic angle, and or like a discipline, like a physical discipline, like control your body type approach of like, how do I get them to sit at the dinner table? But really understanding what's going on with them and how that's going to affect them in social settings, which includes classrooms with teachers and authority, is going to be so helpful for you in managing it. And Caroline, she does workshops, she's got book groups, a whole bunch of stuff. So Caroline McGuire, Why Will No One Play With Me? And then the other thing is every summer there is a 1-week free conference event called the ADHD Parents Palooza. And it's put on by Impact ADHD and Linda Rogley, who's a longtime coach of women with ADHD. And it is just like all the experts and all of them talking about parenting and kids and adolescents and adult children and parents who have ADD. And it's such good content. You can buy a pass for the replay from this year. It just happened, I think, like a month ago. But that happens every summer, the Parents Palooza. So that's another great place to plug in.
Oh, that's very cool. I actually saw the advertisement for that and I missed it. And I'm like, oh, so I'm glad you said that you can actually purchase the replay. So that's really cool. So, you know, it's interesting. I should have asked this at the beginning, but I want to just take a quick step back because some people may still not understand the difference between ADD and ADHD. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And is there really a difference?
There's not really a difference. It's like, you know, as we learn more, things change. They change the names of things. It's basically they change the name. So it used to be attention deficit disorder. They then added in the word hyperactivity. There are subtypes currently, like, you know, formal subtypes of inattentive, combined, and hyperactive. but there is a lot of literature and conversation around many different subtypes and many different presentations. So, you know, used to be it was only called ADD, and that's what I was diagnosed with. And now most people just say ADHD. It doesn't mean that the hyperactivity is front and center for you or for your kid, but that is generally kind of what it's called.
Makes sense. So any other last minute thoughts, closing comments, anything that you would like to share with the parents? Just, you know, sometimes it's just hope. So anything you would like to talk about or share?
Yeah, so okay, so my message of hope is going to start with a real downer. Because that's the way I like to do it, right? Is to sandwich it in. Okay, so here's the thing. There are going to be things about having ADD and about having a kid with ADD, ADHD that are always going to be a challenge. There are going to be things that are harder. And there's no medicine magic, there's no perfect coach or therapist or strategy or desk position that is going to make life in every area easier.
Yeah.
But it can get better.
Yeah.
And the more supportive your environment is, and the more supports you have in place yourself as the parent for you, especially if you are dealing with ADHD yourself, the better the outcomes are going to be for you and for your kids. So it's not a hopeless thing. A lot of people want you to believe it's this like joyous thing, and it's a lot of people call it a superpower. I don't tend to call it a superpower. It hasn't been a joyous thing in my life, though I can see how there are things that I can do that other people can't. I problem solve better than other people do under pressure. That is because of ADHD. You know, people with ADD often come up with innovative and creative solutions to things. That's awesome. The world needs that. We need that creativity.
Right.
That is a good thing. But it comes along with this other side that means I don't fit in. I don't work the way the world works. My brain and my body don't cooperate and don't perform in the way that I wish it would. And so there's a lot about it that can be really heavy and hard to navigate. And just to know that like that's kind of part of it. But when you find the people that support you and you find a community, you start to see that stuff in context of the whole kid, the whole person. Like I am not ADD. It's not my identity. It's a factor. It's a part of my life, but it is not who I am. And it does not, that diagnosis when I was in the 4th grade did not determine my future, even though I had a high school math teacher who wrote on my test that I was going to flip hamburgers at McDonald's for the rest of my life. I didn't apply myself.
Wow.
Yes, I did.
Nice.
Barely graduated high school, took 6 years to get my undergrad, but I got it. And I am now an entrepreneur with an entire career behind me, a first career. So it's not a sentence of anything in particular. There is hope. It is good to know. It's good information to have so that you can work with it. But it is not, it's not the answer to all the problems. And it's also not the key to success. It's just a part of who you are. And yeah, it can be good and it can be hard.
Yeah. And I like that. And I like that. So, and I like the fact that you mentioned everybody looks at it differently, because we discussed, you know, the opposite, that we do look at it as a superpower, but we also look at those who are considered those who have superpowers. They go through their own issues too, right? So, you know, Superman, you think of, you know, he's a lonely person. I mean, he has his own hardships. And so we look at it, to your point, holistically. It's like, no, you're not, this part isn't just, I mean, yes, you have this great part, but then there's also a lot of other things that come with it too, and things that you're going to struggle with. Friendships, for example, is something that, you know, he is building every day, right? And it's just, and that's one reason why I really wanted him in school, because I needed him to help. Well, I needed the assistance in helping him develop his social skills, you know, those type of things. So there are things that he is going to struggle with, and there are things he is going to be absolutely wonderful in. But to your point, you got to look at the full picture. And that's what gets us through the day, is be realistic about the full picture. So that's really good. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, because you're fantastic as always, I love you. And you know, it's kind of funny. You just know when you connect with people, and I love your realistic attitude, and I love how you laugh. And it's just been great talking to you. So
Thank
definitely we
you.
have to stay connected. But anyways, if people want to reach out to you or have any more questions, how can they reach out to you? And if you have any events or anything you would like to tell them about, please do that too.
Okay, thank you for having me. The affection is mutual. And so I run a 3-week group for moms who have ADD or think that they might. And it's just a really kind of quick intro into your neurobiology and building some skills to help you manage. So it's called Thrive Group, and the October group is open for applications now, but that's a rolling thing. So if you're seeing this sometime way in the future, you definitely look for Thrive Group. There's a link in my social media bios. So you can find me on Instagram at Coach Elizabeth Brink, and on Facebook under Thriving Sister Coaching. And you can email me as well, and I'll pass that information on. We can share that. But I love to connect with folks. I do individual one-on-one coaching as well. And so if you want to learn more about that and what it's like to work with a ADHD coach, feel free to reach out. Thank you for having me.
Yes, awesome, awesome. So thank you again for connecting with me and coming on the show again. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, have a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay, bye.